Hey friends, Chris Jones here, talking about Trinity Flynn and the 5 Points Gang. In my last video I talked about the 5 Points Gang, kind of who they were and where they came from. I didn't mention at the time that the 5 Points Gang has two very famous alumni. One of them is a guy named Frank Nitti, who was a major mob enforcer in Chicago after he left New York to go to Chicago where the bootlegging was better. The other guy is a dude named Alphonse Capone. You probably know who Al Scarface Capone is. He was also part of the 5 Points Gang, although he and Nitti had left before the events that we're describing in the book. 1920 is a fascinating time. 1919 and 1920 is a fascinating time in American history. Remember, World War I ends in 1918. Right now we're talking a lot about the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918. And hundreds of thousands of people in New York either have had or currently or have just recovered from this massive pandemic that killed about 50 million people worldwide. It killed people in places that you wouldn't believe that a virus could even get to, and nobody really knows how they did. Remote Pacific islands, the interior of Australia. It killed people all over the planet, and it did so for 2 or 3 years, and then more or less just disappeared. New York is just coming out of that in 1920. Also in 1919, you have two enormous events constitutionally, sort of government type stuff. Number one, you have the passage of the 18th Amendment, which is prohibition, the act known as prohibition. Prohibition is actually enacted by the Volstead Act. The Volstead Act is the one that forbids every kind of alcohol. Most people, when they passed prohibition, they thought, well, we're going to get rid of whiskey. We're going to get rid of hard liquor. They were shocked to find a year or so later that when Congress passed the Volstead Act, that now they couldn't even get a beer. And in fact, if they were ever going to get any kind of a drink at all, they needed to become a Catholic. Catholic church attendance went way up because of sacramental wine. Also, Jews use alcoholic spirits in some of their religious ceremonies, and a lot of that happened as well. Prohibition was very unpopular, but it's hard to repeal a constitutional amendment, and it took them a little over a decade to do it. The other huge event in 1919 is the passage of the 19th Amendment. 19th Amendment, 1919, it means women can vote in presidential elections for the first time. Now, a lot of people think women couldn't vote until 1919, but that's not true. Women could vote in lots of places, in almost all places in the United States. In fact, there had been a woman elected to the state legislature in Utah in the 1890s. So women can vote, they just can't vote for president. And even in New York State, where you could vote for governor if you were female, you cannot vote for president until 1919, till the 19th Amendment in 1919. The first presidential election they could vote in was 1920, as a matter of fact. And William McKinley wins a resounding victory in 1920. And apparently got a huge amount of the female vote. In 1920, you also have the first professional football game. It wasn't called the NFL at the time because you didn't have a National Football League, but you did have a professional game for the first time. You also had the Black Sox scandal. In 1919, the Chicago White Sox win or lose the World Series, and in 1920, a number, 8 of them, are convicted of having thrown the World Series and taken money in order to lose the World Series on purpose. You also have in 1920 the first time anybody records the Charleston and the tango. The tango is, one of those great dances that you see. Lots of jazz music and a huge cultural revolution going on in New York City. It's a great time to write about. There was a lot of riches, a lot of wealth, a lot of social change, and a lot of poverty and misery, and some of that led to crime, which Trinity Flynn gets herself involved in rather interesting ways. Hope you like the book.